evidence shows that physical distancing of more than a meter is highly effective. Oh, so 3 feet was enough in June. They just didn't tell us that. Other medical experts were saying the same thing. In fact, last summer, Dr. Mark Eskett, the medical director for the Austin Public Health System, put it this way, quote, "I know that at 3 feet, there's about an 80% reduction of the transmission of the disease." So it's not actually new information. It was ignored information. And we made policy on the basis of bad information, not on the basis of science, on the basis of lies, justified by 19th century research into tuberculosis. So why are they telling us this now? Well, here's one reason: the political balance of the country has changed. With Joe Biden in charge, Fauci's party wants to see the schools reopen because the public wants it. Parents are upset, and they should be. So all of a sudden, they're changing the so-called scientific recommendations. If that seems too cynical to be real, keep in mind they've done it before. Last summer, dozens of public health experts exempted BLM from coronavirus restrictions. Not because science demanded that BLM get a pass, but because they personally supported BLM. The so-called scientific community signed a letter that will live forever in infamy, claiming, quote, "The risks of congregating during a global pandemic shouldn't keep people from protesting racism. The scourge of white supremacy," the letter said, and we're quoting, "is a lethal public health issue that predates and contributes to COVID-19. Oh, it contributes to COVID-19. Oh, so you thought it may have escaped from a lab in Wuhan that was in part funded by the U.S. government with the knowledge of Tony Facci. So maybe Tony Facci and the government of China might have something to answer for, but now we learn from the scientific community that your racism caused COVID. Oh, okay, well, that makes sense. In June, Johns Hopkins epidemiologist Jennifer Nuzzo declared, quote, "In this moment, the public health risks of not protesting to demand an end to systemic racism greatly exceed the harms of the virus." Again, it's hard to believe that a so-called scientist could write something like that on paper and not be held accountable for it. This is not the first time we've read this on this show. We should do it every single day as a reminder of just how insane a country can go. And no one says anything. That same month, the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, praised the BLM riots that broke out after the death of George Floyd on Memorial Day. Yes, there was a mandatory stay-at-home order in New Jersey and a public health emergency, of course, that justified it. But Phil Murphy wasn't bothered. He said the rioters were, quote, "taking to the streets peacefully to create a better future for our entire New Jersey family." Phil Murphy wrote that even as if his official Twitter page contained the command, "wash your hands, stay at home," end quote. So to restate, if they can justify a riot on the basis of public health, it is healthy to burn stores down, to loot retail outlets. If they can claim that's a public health matter, what can't they justify? What aren't they justifying? Our leaders and public health experts are clearly guided, some of them anyway, by politics. It's hard to digest that because it's monstrous, but it's clear. And what's also becoming clear is how little these experts actually know about some of the topics they claim to be expert in, even in the absence of any obvious political considerations. It's just very hard to know what this virus is going to do. Viruses are hard to understand. This one is new, but no one will admit it. And so out of nowhere, news stories pop up that seem to have no explanation. Here's one example. South Africa, the most affluent country in Africa. Epidemiologists there predicted a surge in coronavirus cases this year. Vacationers were returning from around the world. South Africa was still not under a strict lockdown. There was a new strain, remember that, of the coronavirus? And there was no vaccine for it for most people in South Africa. So it seemed like the perfect place for what Tony Facci might call a super spreader event, a disaster. But that's not what happened. Since mid-January, coronavirus infections in South Africa have plummeted from more than 20,000 a day to about 1,000 a day. Less than 5% of coronavirus tests administered in South Africa are now coming back positive. The question is why? What is going on in South Africa? And the answer is we don't know. And that's fine because science is designed to answer questions to which you don't know the answer. The problem is when the people in charge of our public health systems won't admit that they don't know. So all of this should prompt some pretty tough questions for our public health experts in this country. And one of those questions is, how effective is this coronavirus vaccine? How necessary is it to take the vaccine? Don't dismiss those questions from anti-vaxxers. Don't kick people off social media for asking them. Answer the questions, especially now. The administration would like you to take this vaccine. Joe Biden told you last week, if you don't, you can't celebrate the 4th of July. But it turns out there are things we don't know about the effects of this vaccine. And all vaccines, by the way, it's always a trade-off. But in this specific case, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, these are not third world countries, have just suspended the distribution of AstraZeneca's vaccine. They're saying it could be linked to deadly blood clots. A month ago, the New York Times reported that the FDA and the CDC were looking into reports that Moderna and France, Italy, and Spain, these are not third world countries, have just suspended the distribution of AstraZeneca's vaccine. They're saying it could be linked to deadly blood clots. A month ago, the New York Times reported that the FDA and the CDC were looking into reports that Moderna and Pfizer's coronavirus vaccines could be causing blood clots as well. The paper reported that one 56-year-old physician called Gregory Michael developed a severe case of a blood disorder. Platelets in his blood dropped 3 days after taking the vaccine. Now, without those platelets, his blood couldn't clot. He died of a brain hemorrhage after 2 weeks in the hospital. So, should this scare you? We don't know. But the rest of us deserve an answer. Instead, our leaders are acting, once again, as if the science were totally settled, and you're not allowed to ask questions. You look at the vaccination rates in certain states, and it's pretty clear that some people are not taking the vaccine on purpose. If you want them to take the vaccine, don't berate them. Don't issue more commands. Calm their fears by rationally explaining the benefits and the risks of taking the vaccine. That's how you deal with adults. But instead they're telling you, if you want to see your grandparents ever again, you'll shut up and take the shot.